Hello and welcome to Minecraft Studios video. Today I will show you some more advanced techniques for making your buildings look actually nice. So the first is lining. I have this building that I already have undercoated, then painted with an airbrush, then added some masking, and as you can see it is already colorful, there are some tonal changes, etc. It still looks unfinished. Why? Because it lacks a bit of definition. So for some people this would be enough for the table and I wouldn't blame them, but if you want to add a little bit more to the building, then I would recommend lining. Now for the catalog terrain and for the showcase terrain, I would line every single of those tiles. I don't want you to do this. I will show you just to line enough of the detail to make it look well defined and well, better, and then connect it with some weathering to actually make it look like it's not a fresh building, but it's standing there for some time. So the first thing you need to know is that Airbrush always produces a darker color than your straight from the pot color, which is great news because you can use your paint straight from the pot of the same color that you used on the airbrush to actually highlight it. So this is mainly because of the layers that you use, because the black and gray is still showing through the white, so it's still not pristine white, and the red is still not pristine red. So I will show it to you on an example. I will just use some white color and some big brush. This is number 6 brush, and lining of large models is best done by using the side of the brush, so you don't sit and paint every single line. You can do that, do this, and I do this on a lot of models, but I just want you to do it like this. So you just take the brush, put a bit of paint, and just apply the side of the brush to the model. So you are actually using the angle of the part to steer the width of the line that you are using. So you can use larger brush, which means that it can hold more paint, which means that you can paint for a longer time without having to dip it in the paint to have the good consistency paint on the paintbrush. So just focus on the extreme corners and extreme edges, and then focus on the defining detail that is in the more shaded areas, because it will just look much better with lining. So what I'm now doing is creating those lines, white lines. Now of course I could use do a lot more of those lines, but that's not the point. The point is to have a pure white appear on some extreme edges of the parts, so that when you put it on top of the building, it may or may not look like much, but there is some differentiation between this area and this area. Now between those that were already highlighted with the airbrush with a lot of white, this may not produce a striking effect, but when you focus on those angles that are in the shadow, it will give this model a lot more definition. Now remember that the red is not white, so you don't want to apply a white lining to the red areas. You can either leave them as they are, or you can use the red that you have used for this particular area to actually highlight this area. Now it doesn't look like much has changed, but it has a lot more definition, and I don't want you to actually paint all those lines. You can, but this is not required. Just a little bit here and there will make your model look really cool on the table, and it will look definitely more on par with the miniatures you have, because normally when people paint terrain, they just tend to use a large brush and dry brush and some maybe washes, and that's it. And this leaves the terrain on a substantially lower level than the miniatures. Now, this still has a lot lower level of detail than the miniatures, but these small additions, these small lines that will just clean up the look of the model, will help bring them together. Yeah. So that's it. Not much has changed, but it is a little bit cleaner. On a large building, it would take much more time, but it's still worth it, I believe. It's still worth it. It's not really attention consuming, so you can do this while watching to TV or YouTube, or listening to a podcast, or listening to radio, or your favorite band. So this is something you can do when you cannot focus on painting actual miniatures. Now you can also line in between the parts to make them more defined. For example, this door could be lined in reverse, so it could be shaded basically in the lines. But well, in the first place, the point is to actually paint it with the airbrush in such a way that those lines stay dark, so you don't have to shade them ever. The other thing is that that's what weathering is for. So you use weathering and washes and pigments, etc., to actually make use of those lines and appear them basically better and more weathered. So on to the weathering. The weathering can be done in several different ways, and each of them has some pros and cons. There is no one optimal way, and depending on what materials you have, it will basically define what you will use. The first one is, since we are already using an airbrush, we can use an airbrush to add some dirt to the models. Now, this will not produce any streaking effects, not produce any chipping. It was just to add some more dirt to the model. So we can now add, this is dark earth color, so I'm just using some dark earth to actually add some color near the base of the model, maybe near the doors, so to show that they are used and models are moving through them. But that's about what can be done with the airbrush and weathering. So you can use it to add some different color hues to the model, and you can change the overall white look of the model to have some more wear and tear here and there, but I prefer to use different techniques to that. So we can just maybe add something here, but that's about it. I will leave the other side for other techniques, so you can just show and compare. Also, it really shows good on the white, like so, but I don't see any difference on the red. So the airbrush with the coverage that you are looking for the weathering is only good for the bright parts, but it produces a very subtle and effect, and can tie the terrain with your existing terrain, with your table really well. So especially because you are using the paints that you are using to paint also your other terrain. So yeah, if your miniatures have some earth on the bases and you add this looks already quite alright. Another technique, and this will use a good old paintbrush, is some enamel weathering. and this is my favorite for the time so far. So there are several ways you can do this. You can either go for a specialist product, let's say AK dark matte or AK wash light rust. There are many different colors, and it is suited to some purpose. For the scale modelers, so there will be a difference between a Russian earth and Western Europe earth and South Europe earth. Yeah, I just use the color I like for my miniatures, yeah, because this is sci-fi and fantasy, so it doesn't really matter. Also, all of those colors will look slightly different when applied with some other techniques, so you are not really looking at this perfect color straight from the can. So these are specialist products, and these are more pricey. They are easier to use, definitely, because they have the right consistency, they have the right hue, the right color for what you want to reproduce. For example, this light rust, it is just not orange, not brown, but it's slightly orangey brown, so it works perfect for light rust. Another thing is much cheaper. You can use just enamel paints. So these are Humbrol enamel paints, and then you have to use some of your experience, because the colors, the Humbrol will not tell you what those colors will be good for. So definitely use matte colors, because you don't want any gloss weathering, and then use the colors that you think would look alright. As you can see, this is more like desert yellow color, so this is desert yellow, so this is more like desert yellow. This color is in between rust and earth. So these are just the two I picked because I just use them a lot for my weathering, and I wanted a cheaper option than these two. So what do you do with them? First you open them, obviously, and then with these colors straight from the pot. This is dark matte, so I will apply it near the bottom of the model. You just apply a very dangerously looking lines to the model, and you have to overdo them. These enamels are brilliant because they can be moderated with white spirit or paint thinner, depending on how you call them. So you can just add some strikes. Well, dark matte is maybe not the best color for some strikes and streaking grime. There are some colors for it, but you know, we have some artistic license for it. This is basically our sci-fi terrain, so, and this is your sci-fi terrain, so you have your artistic license for what you use. So let's say I'll call it like this is enough for this, and as you can see, this looks awful right now. It looks like nothing subtle, like nothing like this airbrush. Yeah. So the trick is, and you can combine the different colors, and it's better to apply them in one go and then use white spirit. So I will just use some of the light rust, which is just a little bit orange. It is called rust. I just use it as a different color for my weathering. You can use it for basically rust, but you don't really know how those buildings age and what they are made of. So I applied to, for example, those areas here. I could make a lining around them, and then they would be more defined, but I prefer when I paint basically when I paint models quickly, I prefer to add some weathering to them, because this will still define them in a different way and make them pop on the wall and basically look prettier. So what we now use is paint thinner or white spirit. You want to use it, you want to keep it clean, so you don't want to dab your paintbrush into this bottle. Ideally you want to have some other bottle that you will put your paint thinner used for the weathering into. I will just use the cap for this one and then clean the cap afterwards. Now what you should do, you can let it dry completely for a few hours even. You should let it dry for like about half an hour, because then it is a bit harder to remove with white spirit. And when it's very fresh, it requires a bit of more experience to work with. So what you do is apply the white spirit by brush to the edges of the areas that you applied with your enamel paints first. And so you apply the white spirit to the edges of the area, and then you work them with your brush to produce striking results. So for example, here we produce this, we change this ugly just blob of paint into some gentle streaks, and that are somewhat more prominent near the corners, or basically inside corners of the walls, and just make it appear like we spent hours painting this. So this is when I discovered this technique, it is common for the scale modelers. It is very common for the scale modelers, but somehow this is not really well known in the miniature painters community. So we tend to stick to the acrylic paints because no, the enamels dry for weeks or 24 hours. I want to paint my models fast. I want to thin my paints. I want to lick my paintbrush, so I want to use water. So we tend to stay away from the enamels, and that's why it took me personally so long to actually discover this technique. And the effects it produces are absolutely wonderful. As you can see, this area here was such a mess, exactly like this. But now, right now, it is just some streaks, some grime in more in the crenellations, and you can basically even almost remove it completely with white spirit. So you have a lot of control over it. It will be easier to operate if you wait like half an hour for it, give it a bit time to dry, because then it will not disappear completely when you apply white spirit to it. It will just hang on there for a while and just giving you time to actually figure out what you want to do with the paint and whether you want to remove it or move it somewhere. When it is still almost wet, like it is right now, like I'm showing you, it is very flowing with the white spirit, so it doesn't always produce the best effect. So you should wait like half an hour, but you can even wait a few hours. So when you are, it is perfect for when you are painting several buildings or a whole table of terrain, because then you can just apply these generous, very thick lines of the enamel paints to all the corners, and then when they are dry, you just go over them with white spirit. This is a bit smelly, of course. White spirit or paint thinner for enamel paints is smelly, but it is very absent-minded job. It is just joy to observe how the white spirit makes the paint disappear and vanish, and it can be used in a limited way on miniatures too. some areas like boots or on the bases of the miniatures, you can just weather them and add some different hues and colors, and basically this is just blending supreme. I love it. I love it. It is very easy to work with. It works exactly the same with those paints. It is just that they are thicker, so they are harder to work with. Ideally you don't want to use them straight from the pot. You want to put a little bit of the paint in some container, preferably with a lid. So some old used paint pot would be perfect. Then use some white spirit and add the white spirit to the paint to actually make it like milk or something, or even thinner. Milk is all right. So this then becomes the similar consistency to the professional products, but you get basically more of them for the same price. A bit more work involved, yeah, but they are work exactly the same. With this, you don't have to think about the choice of the colors. So the colors are on the. It says here what it is, and it looks like this. The last weathering material I am using, and I sometimes use, and I think that you may want to use, is pigments. Pigments are just dry pigment that you have to apply to the model and then secure it somehow in this place. So I am using MIG pigments, and there are several different companies that are using producing pigments. AK does them, Forge World does them, so there are several different basically pigments. So what they look is, this is completely dry dust, colored, basically this one is colored medium rust. So what you do with them is apply them with a brush, with a dry brush, and you apply them very generously. Basically generously for one technique. So you want a lot of them. And what you can do with pigments that you cannot do with other paints is to produce texture. So if I don't have any more cool rust colors, so I will just use some Europe Earth here, just for the shits and giggles. So as you can see here, when I just apply a lot of the pigment, I could just blow on it and it would vanish, but you can secure pigment in one of two ways. You can secure it with a pigment fixer, or a pigment binder. Now the difference is that a pigment fixer from this company, this is also a MIG product, is basically somehow based on enamel. It can be also fixed using fixer or enamel thinner. Yeah, so you can fix the pigments also using enamel thinner. It appears, and this pigment binder is an acrylic medium. So the way they work is completely different. This one you want to apply near the edges of your pigment area, and let it penetrate the pigment. As you can see, it just searches for the pigments and flows into them. Now the downside of this, especially for this demonstration, is that this is enamel, so in order to produce the complete result we will need to wait at least 24 hours. So what I think we'll do is take a picture of it tomorrow or on Monday, and then you will be able to see the effect it produces. And maybe, because I have a lot of pigment here, there is a lot of pigment in here, there might be some texture here. This is perfect for producing rust or actually spilled earth. Yeah, so this is one way to do this. Another way you can work with this pigment is, right now when it's already penetrated, it is very random pattern, but it's very natural. or you can use your brush and actually work this pigment as you would this thing. So as you would enamel paint. This can be also combined with enamel thinner, so white spirit. So you can, as you can see, it dissolves it. So the pigment binder would bring the pigment with your paintbrush. The enamel thinner will remove it, so you can somehow control it. So this here is very similar to the area here. So this is large area with slightly blended paint using the pigment. This area here is what is most interesting about pigments. Now the pigment binder works very differently. It basically produces areas similar to this, but dries in a short time, because this is acrylic medium, so it dries like your normal acrylic paint. The thing is that this here will be much darker and much more subtle than what appears now, and this acrylic medium, the pigment binder, will be exactly like it is. So when you start working with one, which is what happened to me when I started working with one pigment fixer, and then tried to I looked for different ways of using it. I was very surprised that the pigments I applied and used a different medium were looking completely different with this other medium. So I will now apply it on this corner and use the pigment binder. As you can see, it doesn't penetrate the pigment at all. So you can add some of those binders, but it behaves completely differently. So you actually have to manually move your paintbrush and combine it with the pigment. It just produces completely different result, and as you will see later when we take the picture of it after this thing is dry, it will produce a totally different result. Now the thing is that with the pigment fixer, the enamel pigment fixer, you can go for the texture. Now with the pigment binder, with the acrylic medium pigment binder, you really want to do something like this, but with pigments. So yeah. And another thing is that you cannot use white spirit to blend it in, so you have to use water. It will dry quicker. It is different. I prefer to work with pigment fixer. Yeah, thank you, pigment fixer, Sergeant Pigment Fixer. Yeah. So these are the basic weathering techniques. I will most likely finish this wall so that we can show you the pictures when it's all finished, and yeah, just try them. There are many different ways you can, many different techniques you can use. I just showed you 4. So Airbrush, enamels, pigment fixer, pigment binder. Yeah, so 3/4. So yeah, tell us what you think about this, and enjoy and happy painting.